Salvage, and I'm here to talk to you about 6 things you should know about resin before you even open the box. Don't tear into that box just yet. I know your mind is going a mile a minute with all the projects you want to do, and it's exciting and it's intimidating, but you need to plan just a little. I was originally going to title this Everything I Learned About Resin from Spilling It on the Floor, but this isn't really everything I know about resin, and I learned some stuff from getting it in my hair too. So slow your roll for a couple minutes. We are going to talk about how to protect your workspace, how to get it out of your hair, which I did just yesterday, by the way. That and some other stuff, let's get to it. The very first thing you need to think about is where will you be working on your resin? Do you have a dedicated craft space, or are you going to be using a room that's going to pull double duty? Either way, there's some things you need to keep in mind before you get started with your resin. Let's talk about the dual function space. If you're going to be working in a space that's going to be pulling double duty, such as a kitchen, a bedroom, a dining room, the very first thing you need to remember is resin takes time to cure and resin makes a mess. I don't care how neat you are, at some point or another, you're gonna get it in a lot of places you never expected. If you plan on working with resin in the kitchen, you wanna keep your resin projects away from anything that's gonna get into contact with food or food preparation, because resin generally is not food safe. There's some that have come out now that are saying that they are food safe. Do your research, but most resins are not. And you definitely want to resist the urge to pick up something that you are going to use for food, like a spoon that's laying around, a spatula, whether it's to mix something, to wipe something up, or to pick something out of the resin. Whatever you do, use something that is dedicated for use with your resin. And if you do accidentally use something in your resin that was kitchen stuff, just forever dedicate it to your craft room now. Make it a craft tool forever. So if you're working in the kitchen, the dining room, the den, or any space where people or pets might roam, you want to just be very clear that resin takes time to cure. And that means tables should not be bumped, molds should not be moved, and by gosh, do not stick your finger in it. My biggest resin challenge has always been, not with I have cats, they've always been fine, but with my husband or any male in my family that happens to wander through my craft room while a project is setting up. I have a craft shed now, so it's a little bit different. Nobody bugs me here for the most part, but when I had it in the house up north, my husband would walk through and the first thing he would say is, "Hey, is this dry?" while he's sticking his finger in it. No, we don't do that. You ask, "Hey, is this dry?" before you stick your finger in it, and you wait for an answer. And it's not like it happened just once. It would happen over and over again. It's not like there's like some learning curve that they catch on to. We had a nephew staying with us, told him the whole process, how it had to go. We were making a gift for his mom. Next thing I know, he sees it, he's admiring it, and he's like, "Is this dry?" Bam, right back in there. I'm like, you have got to be kidding me. So if you have a dedicated workspace, like lock the door or put a sign, "No boys allowed," or something. Just make sure their fingers stay out of there. So the things to remember is resin takes time to cure. And if you are working on multiple projects, you need to make sure that you aren't bumping the other ones while you're working on it. Especially if it's something that is filled to the top of like a mold or something, because if you bump it, it's just gonna wash right over the edge. And you have to be realistic. You have to realize that dust, scraps, hair, fur, glitter, and other things will unexpectedly work their way into your resin projects at some time or another. It's just gonna happen. You might try to keep it clean, but you will never have a dust-free, sterile environment where everything will be perfect. If you need to use your craft space for something else, like let's say the dining room table, you can always put your mold or whatever you're working on a tray or a piece of wood or a cookie pan or something, and then very carefully, very levelly, pick them up and put them someplace safe. And give yourself some room, because just as resin can unexpectedly end up in your hair, it can end up on your dining room table, in the carpet, on your tile floor, your hardwood floors, wherever. Somehow it just mysteriously will drip in places or get onto things that you swear you have never touched. It just happens. Be organized. Think it through ahead of time. And this is a do as I say, not as I do, because I am not an organized person at all. If you're organized, life will be easier and you will be a lot more productive. Number 3, a level work surface. As resin is curing, it's obviously a liquid, so it is going to, if your table is leaning, then your mold is going to be sitting on it that way, and more resin is going to end up here than up here. So you need to make sure you have a level work surface. So put a level on your work surface, and let's say you're working on the dining room table and there is a little tilt. Put a piece of wood on there and do like popsicle sticks under whatever side, just until you get it leveled, and then you're good to go. When I started making coasters years ago, I didn't realize the floor in my craft room was a little not quite right, and my coasters would end up a little thicker on one end than the other. Number 4, protecting your work surface. So before you get started, put a little thought into how you're going to protect your work surface. There's a lot of different ways you can do it, but it's not really just your work surface. You kind of want to protect the surrounding areas, especially if you are prone to drips or anything. And let's be honest, sometimes resin is going to end up somewhere and you will have no clue how it got there, and you will swear up and down that that wasn't from you and you don't know. Let's talk about things that will protect your work surface. Parchment paper. Parchment paper, I found out early on, resin will not permanently stick to parchment paper. It will stick to it, but it peels off very easily. And if you have watched my resin videos from way back when, they never had like a coaster mold back then, so I created my own with like this yellow egg shaper, and I'd hot glue it to the parchment paper. So that was my mold. So I would have the parchment paper actually being the bottom part of my mold, and then when it was done, I was able to just peel it all off. A couple things to keep in mind about parchment paper is, number 1, it will leave a matte finish on your resin. Because parchment paper has a matte finish, that's what you're going to end up with. It's very easy to work with. You just rip off the size you need and you got it. Parchment paper is pretty amazing, a little bit like Superman, except its kryptonite is water. If you get any water on it, it's going to ripple that parchment paper right up. Garbage bag or other plastic bag. You can line your tabletop, your surface, with a garbage bag and then just throw it away later. And that is not going to let the resin seep through, and usually you'll have a 2-ply situation, so you're extra protected. So really any kind of plastic. So if it's plastic wrap, you can use like a vinyl tablecloth from like a dollar store or something inexpensive. You can cut off what you need and save the rest for next time. Cheap, super cheap. The next one is wax paper. Wax paper is a lot like parchment paper in that it won't let the resin seep through, and it will peel off the wax paper. The resin and the wax paper will peel off from each other very easily. The next one is silicone. And a lot of the silicone stuff was kind of just coming out when I started, so I just fell in love with them right from the beginning. So now there's like a million silicone molds and stuff that were not available at that time. I love working on a silicone mat. They have large ones for your work surface and even larger ones for the floor, so you can protect your floor. They're reusable, they're durable, you can peel the resin right off. Here's one that I've been using for years, and look at it. Peels right off. I use them all the time, and I'm planning on going larger with that as well. I have a couple in mind that I'll have down in the description below. Whatever you do, avoid using paper, regular paper, because the resin will seep right through, soak right in, and it will stick right to your work surface. So you're gonna have to peel all of it off, and you won't just be peeling off the resin, but you'll be peeling off the paper. Tip number 5 is to protect yourself. Very important. You need to look into what resin you're using, because there are different kinds. Some require you to use a mask and some say that you don't need to. So that's something you're going to need to look at the directions. Always follow the manufacturer's directions. Number 1, when mixing. Number 2, when learning what kind of protective stuff you need to wear. Generally, always have to wear gloves, and some of them need you to wear a respirator. Some have strong odors and fumes that you just don't want to deal with. And remember, always default to whatever the manufacturer said. They made it, they know their product, they know the ups, the downs, the dangers, not dangers, all of that stuff. They know everything about their product more than anyone else, more than I or anybody else on the internet is going to tell you. The manufacturer knows. So while protecting yourself, also wear old clothes. You're going to get resin on yourself. You're going to lean into something, bend over something. Something's going to get into something, and if you're wearing your good clothes, they're now resin cloth. You aren't going to get that out of there. It will like soak right into the fibers and be permanent. So let's talk about the gloves again. You want to use the gloves that prevent the chemicals from going through. So you don't want the latex ones. You want the, I think it's pronounced nitrile, Nitrile. Those are the gloves that you want. You can get them at Walmart, any drugstore. You can pick them up a lot of different places. So those are the gloves, and again, the respirator. You want the respirator if your resin calls for that. And I would strongly recommend safety glasses, because if anything should shoot out and drip, you don't want resin in your eye. You don't want the glitter in your eye. You don't want any of that stuff in your eye. Just get some safety glasses. They're inexpensive and will save you a lot of trouble. And another one to protect yourself that I never, ever, ever, ever do, but should, is pull back your hair. If you have longer hair, put it in a ponytail, get a scrunchie, get a clip, get a rubber band. I don't care, just pull it back. I just did it again the other day. I've been working with resin well over 10 years. I got it in my hair the other day. No idea how. But it might be on your gloves. It might be on, you might bend over into something, or maybe you got it someplace else that you didn't realize and you brushed up against something. Who knows? It just happens. So if you have an itch or something, don't scratch it while you're working with your resin. Don't even use like the back of a paintbrush. Somehow resin's gonna get everywhere. I don't care if your hair is long, if it's short, or whatever. Just try to keep it out of there. It just makes it easier. But if you do get it in there, the best way that I have found is either using wet wipes or rubbing alcohol. Get it in there while it's wet. Do not let it cure, because you will never ever get it out. It will be short haircut time. And the last item is environment. Let's talk about that. So we briefly talked about pet hair dust, people, and let me recap that a little bit and talk about a couple more. Unless you lock them out or really drive home the do not touch my wet resin project home to them, you're gonna have to figure out the best way. You know your family and your friends, you're gonna have to figure out the best way to keep them out and away from your resin, because they can be a wild card. Dust, pet hair, and just people hair. Let's talk about that for just a second. Those are things you do have to worry about, but there is an easy solution that you can do for most of your projects. If you have, let's say like the coasters, right? If you have a coaster mold or some other smaller mold and you're worried about any hair, fur, dust, anything getting in there, lint, whatever, all you have to do is cover it up. But you want to make sure you do not cover it up with anything plastic. You need to have it breathe. So if you have a thin piece of paper, just copy paper, that you can place across it, that would work, and it will still allow enough airflow and won't make humidity build up in your project. But you want to make sure it doesn't like dip down. Like if your mold is too wide, you don't want it to dip down into it, because if you dip that paper into the resin, it now becomes part of your project. Another environmental factor is humidity. Resin does not like humidity. It will either cloud up or it will not cure properly. It'll keep that stickiness to it, and you can't really ever get rid of it. So if you live in the desert, you probably don't have too much to worry about. But if you live in a more humid environment, or like I worked in our basement for the longest time, you just need to keep that in mind, whether you're running the air conditioner to get the humidity out of the house, or if you're running a dehumidifier. That's what we did up north. And temperature. Temperature is another environmental factor that you want to take into consideration. Generally between 70 to 90 degrees is a pretty safe environment for your resin to dry in. That's the temperature range that's usually okay. Now again, check with whatever resin you're using. The manufacturer might have different parameters that you want to know about beforehand. Because if it's too cold, it will either prolong your curing time or just stall it out where it won't cure properly at all. And if it's too hot, it might speed up your curing time and you might not have enough time to do what you wanted to do. And if it's too cold, you might also get micro bubbles in there, and you might also get a little bit of a cloudy resin. So those are the 6 things I wanted you to take into consideration before you even start with your resin. It helps with your work surface, it helps to protect you, it helps you take into consideration all of the factors around you that might be wild cards that you just want to think about a little bit beforehand. I hope it helps, and if you are having trouble with your resin curing, go over here and you will find a video with the 5 top reasons why your resin isn't curing, and I will help you out with that.